Welcome everyone to our weekly webinar for the CMOP CMOOC, and to anyone from the Escalate Mobile Learning Special Interest Group or from the Software Research Cluster who might like to watch or join us. And tonight we're looking at operational issues, which is the second, well actually the first core area of CMOP portfolio. Last week we looked at the contextual statement, which although is the first part, is not actually assessed. So joining us tonight, we have all the way from Belgium, Stephen Virgins.
Hi there.
And I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Steve, or close.
That's okay. That's okay.
So obviously not. Okay, and we also have Todd Stretton, one of our physio lecturers here on the North Shore at Auckland.
Hi, everyone.
So great to have you two along, and hopefully a few others will join us as we go, or at least watch live. Now, I know that Amanda did message and say she was looking forward to watching, but she hasn't joined yet, so we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's sort of 8 o'clock at night here in New Zealand. We've got daylight saving, which means it's a little bit earlier back in the UK and Belgium than it was last week. So Steve said he's had his breakfast and taken the dog for a walk.
It's 9 o'clock here in Belgium. It's 8 in the UK. So.
Right. Yeah, so we've done the opposite. We've had our dinner and fed the dog and let the dog go out for the
there
night. Yeah. So what I'll do, I'll just go into screen sharing and we'll have an overview of where we're at with this week and just have a bit of discussion around some of the issues. So I'll just flick into screen sharing. There we go. Present to everyone. Right. So you can see Steve's just posted to the Google Plus community. We've had a bit of activity this week, probably not quite as much as the first week, but you know, it's kind of a busy time of year for everyone. And you can see Raj has posted his visitor resident map. There's been a little bit of activity, which is good to see, a bit of interaction. Lisa has posted her visitor resident map, kind of our digital literacy exercise. And Steve's going to tell us what this means soon for his operational issues. So interesting looking image there. Okay, so week 2 of the CMOOC. If we look on the cmopcmooc.wordpress.com, basically the overview site, you can see we're exploring operational issues. And the post there, we had a few suggested activities for people for this week, just to get them sort of thinking around these issues. One was to create a blog post or a video podcast discussing the constraints and benefits of technical knowledge and deployment of learning technology. So those are the 3 key areas of operational issues. And you know, keep it reasonably short. No one wants to watch a 30-minute podcast. Just something nice and short and to the point. And if you're doing text, then somewhere around 500 words. So we suggested doing a visitor resident map, which of course is developed by Dave White from the UK. And this is kind of really in reaction to the digital native myth. And we think it's a much better idea of looking at use of technology and how people use it. It's not about your age or the fact that teenagers' brains are biologically different to ours. It's about where you put your effort and whether you engage with technology or not and how you engage. So the visitor resident map's quite a nice little tool. You look at technology that you occasionally use. You're in the visitor domain. If you're in the resident domain, it's technology you use all the time. And then how you use it is the vertical axis, which in our case we've chosen professional and social. I know Dave has institutional and personal, I think. But we've modified it slightly. And of course, joining our Hangout right now. So if you're wanting to join, you have to be in quick, but you can watch it later anyway. So those 3 key areas that that this part of the portfolio needs to address. 1, an understanding of the constraints and benefits of different technologies. So providing some evidence around what you've done to explore that, description of what you've done, some evidence, and then reflection of the impact of what worked and what didn't really, and how did you go about mitigating that or changing it or helping other people to make stuff work with regards to learning and teaching. So it's always got to come back to learning and teaching. Second part there is technical knowledge and ability to use and learning and the use of learning technology. So that's more sort of techie part, perhaps illustrated by maybe there's a couple of tools that you used and you can use really well that you want to use as examples. And then finally, supporting the deployment of learning technologies is kind of how you support other people or the rollout, how you've been involved in that. Perhaps you've been like an evangelist in your department, a bit like Todd, or like myself, it's more of a central support role. So those are the key areas of operational issues, and it'd be great to get people sort of sharing some visitor resident maps, some blog posts, some discussion, some thoughts around this. And once again, we'd encourage people to put that into the project bank on the WordPress site. So if I click on here, it links to the project bank. Starting to get a few examples there now. We've got plenty in the contextual statement. It'd be good to get a few more under operational issues. We've got a couple of new ones there. One from Lisa, and hopefully we get a few more tonight or later this week as well. So basically in the project map, what you're doing is putting a link to your example. So here's Lisa's, and basically it's a link back to her image in the Google Plus community and a description of that. So there's her visitor resident map. So Lisa, of course, works in our Blackboard support team, so Blackboard features quite highly here. So we had to give her, negative mark for that, but that's okay. And then, of course, there's a lot of social media there, which we can probably encourage Lisa to engage with a bit more professionally as well. So it's interesting to see everyone's different maps. And the other thing I think as well is to even do this exercise with your students and compare to your own and see what the differences are. And I think this is a quick way of actually discovering that generally our students don't actually engage with a whole lot of technology, and the most of the technology that they do engage with is at a social or personal level. So
Tom,
that's.
can I just say something?
Yeah. I'll just stop my screen sharing so we can see your wonderful face.
It was really more just to say, well done, Lisa, on getting hers up and seeing Raj's as well. But as you say, it's nice also to be able to compare and contrast to where you're at personally, and to know that you can be different.
Yeah.
But as you say, I think this is my second MOOC, and just even to compare it from when I first started to now as well, just to see that there's some slight changes as to how you've adapted because you have been listening to and been drawn in conversation with other people. So it's a really nice way to capture how you have been using social media.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. If you have done this exercise before, then it's a really nice reflective idea to do it again and compare where you're at now with where you were before, and discuss maybe the differences. Are there some key differences, and why, and what's the impact been? So, Steve, have you done a visitor resident map?
No, not yet. As I said to you before the meeting started, I've been very busy this week. And so I decided to join it just to keep the pace going somehow. The interesting thing, adding on to what Todd was saying, that sometimes it depends from week to week. Very coincidentally, this week I've been very involved in operational issues because colleagues came up to me and said, I have to go and do an interview. Do you know anything about Audacity? And I would go, okay, yes, I know about Audacity, but I haven't used it for a number of years. The same with, this afternoon I'm doing I'm handing out degrees for our students, and we decided, let's make it more interactive. And so I decided I'd use a tool that I got to know at Alt this year, which is Me2 with double E. And it's a kind of, classroom clicker technology in a sense. So that's something I haven't used ever before, but because this week it fit into the program, I decided let's go into that. So even week per week, you could say that my digital map changes, my digital literacy map. Similarly with, for the course that we are developing for the thesis students, we decided instead of just having textual introductions, we would make small videos as well. So this week I made a small video, which was again 5 or 6 years ago. Or like last week, the Hangout that we're using now, that was a few years ago as well. So depending on what you're working at, you refresh your knowledge or you start learning new tools and new technologies. So in that sense, it keeps shifting all the time. So it would be nice to, make a snapshot every year. Or, for instance, I don't know how you do it at your institutions. We have an annual talk with our supervisor about, the work that we do and professional development. It would be nice to, make a snapshot every year before you're going into your functioning discussion with your supervisor and say, this is where I am this year. That would make sense.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a simple tool, but it's a great way of reflecting. And I guess I'm a fan of simple tools that do get people thinking. Rather than making it too hard for them, trying to delve into activity theory and tie them all up in knots. Just using something simple that they can actually apply to their context. So anyway, it's just kind of a brainstorming tool to get people thinking around operational issues and constraints and benefits of learning technology. And one of those might be, the technology that you're using as a teacher, none of the students actually use, or are only using because they're forced to. Is there actually better technologies, or are there technologies that they would use more authentically as a graduate in the context of whatever it is they're training for? Thinking beyond the LMS.
Yeah, it would be nice to look at different student profiles.
Yeah. And I think it'd be nice to get a nice collection of these in our project bank as well. And if people can just give a little bit of a description, I suppose, but of them, so we get a bit of context around them. So coming back to your wonderful image there, Steve.
Yeah, it builds onto what I was saying before. This afternoon, there's this presentation of degrees to our students. And only the day before yesterday, we found out that there were no beamers installed and we couldn't get any beamers there. So in order to present the web address and the number of the meeting room that the attendants would have to use, I was just printing them all out on small pieces of paper. And the image that you see is this very nifty tool that I have of cutting straight lines. If I have to do it with scissors, it looks like a 5-year-old. So I decided just, print 7 copies of this sheet and then cut them up and put them on the chairs this afternoon when I arrive in the meeting room. So that's technology that hardly ever fails, actually. So
that's right. It's interesting, even just differences in terminology between perhaps different countries. You talk about beamers, I presume you mean a video projector.
Yes, projectors, yes.
Which is, what we would call them. Hey, Ian, good to see you.
Hey, I've been hanging around outside trying to get in, but finally made.
So, take it away, Ian. The rest is all yours. No,
okay.
Just throwing you in the deep end there.
I thought that, yeah. Well, I'll talk about my cup of tea.
So, we've just been discussing operational issues, which is this week's topic and the first core area of the CMOP portfolio. And so that's looking at constraints and benefits technology, your technical expertise in teaching and learning with technology, and supporting the deployment of technology for teaching and learning. And
an interesting thing I'd like to add about the last one. As I was saying before, sometimes it depends on just coincidence. But last weekend we rolled out a new version of our VLE, which we're building ourselves. And last Monday was, trying to upload some pages or update them, and it turned out that some bug was there. And you know how it goes. I sent the bug to the techie people, and they said, no, it doesn't happen. you're wrong. So I actually had to go there and sit next to this guy and say, go through all the pages and say, this is what happens. There you have the evidence. And then he goes into the back office of this thing and goes, okay, yeah, click, 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 click. Oh yes, now I found it. So it's this kind of problems you meet when being faced with the technology people as a user and saying, I ran into this problem, and they'll say, no, you must do something wrong, which is the first reflection that they have. And then actually the openness was there for my colleague to just sit next to him and demonstrate what happened. And then he was able to, think it through and say, okay, this is probably where the bug is situated. And he was able to solve it in 5 minutes. But there was an hour of emails going back and forth before that moment. So I suppose looking at every one of you, this is very recognizable behavior.
Yeah, I think part of the key is building that bridge to the IT department, but for them to, look at their own role beyond just being in control of technology to how is it empowering people in teaching and learning. Yeah. And I think part of the key there is learning how to problem solve, like you're sort of talking about. There always will be something that goes wrong, but it's how do you deal with that when it does go wrong.
I think the whole thing's quite an interesting issue, actually, because it's very much about cultures. And I don't know if anybody here has worked on the other side, sort of providing services and things like that. It's it can be quite an eye-opener to try and sort of put yourself in the sort of technical suppliers side when facing these things, because often what appear to us to be quite trivial things can be quite difficult to have quite big implications. But then also the other way around, it'd be quite nice, I think, sometimes if perhaps the more technical people appreciate our side, if you like. So I think just understanding and empathy with that, I think, can sometimes really help, if you like, sort of smooth the issues. One of the things we do here is try and encourage our IT services people to come and join in our teaching courses and actually sort of, perhaps understand the realities of lecturing and things. Anyway, there we go.
Yeah, I think that's a really important reflection, and one that would be really good on anyone's portfolio is around that whole issue, I suppose, collaborating with IT services.
Well, in this case, it was actually a learning technology guy. So it's a colleague who's also into the research part and the teaching part, but he's been so embedded into this technological area. He shifts culture, as you were saying, and he moves more towards a technological culture than, the learning and teaching culture.
Right.
Looking at it, we have to control the system and have to make sure that it's, robust and stuff like that. So those become overarching in his argumentation, his reasoning. So it's interesting to see how people shift culture depending on where they are situated.
I think it's part of the key when you're putting together your CMOP portfolio. It's not about the technology; it's about the impact on teaching and learning. It's about how technology can enhance teaching and learning. So, often people perhaps slip into the mindset of talking about technology for technology's sake or describing technology rather than, the pedagogy behind it and what was the point of it. So, teaching with technology instead of teaching about technology, I suppose, is easy to sort of slip into. So, look, I know Ian has done some, some last year of some examples in the project bank, but looking forward to you perhaps sharing your visitor resident map if you haven't done that already, Ian, or a new version of it.
Absolutely. Nag away. I need to do it. Yeah.
It's all good evidence for your portfolio.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
you've got the weekend to work on.
Yeah. Any other points that people would like to bring up? Anything that doesn't make sense around this section? Actually, Todd has just submitted his portfolio.
I was just about to say, within the operating or operational issues area, it's also remembering that there are those three different parts, and just reassuring when talking with others like yourself, Tom, that there can be some overlap to those different areas. So, for instance, as far as for 1A about technology constraints and benefits, I was talking about an example where I'm presenting with a physio case scenario and trying to think of a different way to present it to the students. And so being able to describe that and then coming across the idea about 360 cameras and using SeatBeat to be able to present it to students, and talking about the constraints and benefits of using that, and how it then impacted on my own teaching. But you know, there is that point that hits 1A, but you are talking about the technical knowledge and use of the technology-enabled learning, so that's 1B. And then when I felt confident about actually using it, I went about being able to really started out with my own cheat sheet. So I knew that the next time that I did something like this, that I would have a how-to, a dummies guide, and that rolled out to being something that went to an education day. So just making sure that you are reflecting on those things, but knowing that there's the potential that it can roll into all those different areas.
Yeah, I think it's kind of just working smarter in a lot of ways, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, Steve.
No, I was just thinking, as Todd was saying, these three areas overlap, of course. So in a sense, in the portfolio, what you try to do is separate them while they're usually very integrated. But I think it helps to separate them because you think differently about the three different aspects. You know, the technological knowledge and ability that seems to be underlying before you can do, you can understand the constraints and benefits. So in a sense, they are related, I'd say. I was thinking the 1A, that sounds very familiar to these affordances that Gráinne Cannoli usually talks about. I suppose that's related. Constraints and benefits and affordances is similar.
Yeah. I think it's useful to bring in theory, to back up your choices and why you do things. I think it shows a solid foundation if you can link to particular articles and theory that you think have really influenced what you do. So one that comes to mind for me in this sort of area, there's a paper that Gilly Salmon wrote called "Sleeping with the Enemy," which is all about her working in collaboration with IT services while being sort of in charge of technology and teaching and learning. So I thought there's quite a nice take on it. Yeah, well, I think
I just to find the time to finish all of this, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You don't have to finish it all over these 7 weeks.
No, it's true.
This is really just to give you an idea where to go.
So make the start. That's the point. That's get going.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I think Todd, it took you a fair while to put together, didn't it?
Yeah, I think from go to woe, it was a year and a half.
Wow.
And that's obviously with busy periods in between as well. And it's just that reminder of having these prompts, whether it be through the CMOOCs or through just discussions with one another, that just helps to keep you accountable and stay on track. Yeah,
true.
Yeah, it can look like a really big thing to start with, but I think it's just map out the sections on your chosen portfolio platform and just chip away at different sections as you have time and motivation, creativity. You don't have to do it all at once. I know some people who basically just taken off a week or 2 weeks and done it all in that time, and then polished it off afterwards. But everyone works differently. So, and then of course there's Ian, who has done some, and then we have to keep on pushing him, keep on prodding him.
But he's enjoying his tea.
Yes,
yeah, that's true.
Nice cup of tea. There we go.
I particularly enjoyed the intro video you did last year, Ian, on the chair, trying to encourage everyone to see how many cycles they could get on the chair.
The interaction, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, it's a smile. But one of the things I do find interesting with the technology is how you build that sort of community and stuff like that. And so, although it was a bit of a sort of Friday afternoon smile, but often I think putting little challenges in like that can actually be it builds groups and things. So
yeah. How do you replace the face-to-face interaction when it's all fully online?
Yeah, that's. I notice now I notice that every time I start working on a blog post, I'm very familiar with twittering. So just have 280 characters and say this is my opinion on such and such. But when I start writing a blog post, I feel that it has to be really substantial, and it has to be really thought out, and that is such a barrier for me. That means that I have about 20 draft blog posts which never get posted because I feel that they have to be more solid than a Twitter post. So that's something I'll have to work on, to just say, as Tom was saying, just put it out there, short, brief, and say, what I was talking about before, just write it down in 2 paragraphs and put it out there so people can react to it.
Probably
just think another thing you can do too is if you find it a little bit difficult to write, is just record yourself talking. Do a little discussion that you can embed into your blog, and then if you wanted to, you could use some speech-to-text software to transcribe it even. But don't feel it has to be written essay style.
As I said, I know it shouldn't be, but it's just somehow I start working and then it adds up always. So I have to work on that. That's an attitude problem. That's okay. Cool. That's 1D, I suppose.
I will look forward to seeing your portfolios develop over the next few weeks. Hey, well, thanks everyone, and I think we'll let you go and finish having your breakfast, and we're going to probably have our dessert, and look forward to the weekend. We're a little bit closer to the weekend than you are, which is really nice.
That's true. Well, enjoy the weekend. And also
Monday morning.
Yes. Well, I suppose.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Hey, well, thank you, team, and we look forward to talking next week when we're looking at the third core area, which is, let me just have a quick look because so I can remember, is Week 3, Exploring Learning, Teaching and Assessment, which is probably the easiest part, I think, for most people, apart from the contextual statement, because that's generally what lecturers do. So it shouldn't be too difficult for most people to find evidence and reflect on that. Unless, of course, you're in more of a support role, and then you would talk about how you collaborate with people to do that. Okay, so that's all for us for tonight. Thank you, everyone, from the UK, Ian, from Belgium, Steve, from across the shore in New Zealand, sunny New Zealand, Todd, signing off, and thank you very much.
Have a good weekend.